1969 was a good year for technological advancements, both in aerospace and space. On July the 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 landed on the moon and promised to open the door to our exploration not only of the moon, but also the solar system. And just a few months earlier, Concorde had made its first test flight on the 2nd of March 1969. Now, while the moon rush lasted just 2.5 years and was all over by Apollo 17 in December 1972, Concorde soldiered on until October 24, 2003, when it was finally retired 3 years after the fatal crash of Air France Flight 4590. And much like the moon missions, supersonic passenger flights were relegated to the history books, as we took the slow but maybe not quite so scenic route in air travel. But as Dylan said, the times they are a-changing. Space and the moon are back on the agenda once more, and supersonic passenger travel could be making a comeback if Boom Supersonic has anything to do with it. So could a 21st century version of Concorde be back in the skies by the 2030s? This video is sponsored by Magellan TV. Magellan TV is a documentary streaming service run by filmmakers that have a passion for their work. Magellan believe that knowledge is key, and their mission is to tell great stories that define our world and show how we got to where we are. Magellan has over 3,000 documentaries available, with more being added all the time, with a wide selection of those being in 4K at no extra cost, and you can also stream them directly to your smartphone or tablet wherever you are. As we are looking at supersonic transport, then I think you'll enjoy Magellan's Extraordinary Flights, a film about the supersized cargo planes and the incredible loads they carry, from animals to vehicles to even other planes, and how these exceptional aircraft are designed and built. You can watch this and many more by getting your 1-month free trial using the link for this special offer right at the top of the description below, and I'm sure you'll enjoy Magellan TV as much as I have. Imagine bringing back Concorde for the 21st century, but with the benefit of hindsight and all the access to the technological advancements that have occurred in the last 50 plus years since the original was designed, and where environmental concerns play a much greater role than they did in the 1960s. This is the challenge that Boom Supersonic have set themselves, and if things go well, we could see the return of supersonic transport by the 2030s with their Overture aircraft. In a recent interview, Blake Skoll, Boom's CEO, said that the ultimate goal was to offer anywhere in the world in 4 hours for $100. Now that's not going to happen anytime soon, but in maybe 2 or 3 generations of the aircraft, it could be possible and make supersonic travel what subsonic travel is now, but in a much more environmentally sustainable way. That's a challenge, and it's a very large one, as the US startup Boom Supersonic is not an established player like Boeing or Airbus, and they won't be bankrolled by a government like Concorde. Whilst they have the benefit of hindsight and are looking to avoid the problems that beset Concorde, they're having to start afresh because the tech of today is very different to the tech of the 1960s, and so are the requirements. Back then, this was a completely new way to transport passengers by air. The only people who had done this at the time were military pilots in fighters or specialised aircraft. High fuel consumption and things like sonic booms were just seen as part of doing business, whilst pollution from nitrogen oxides into the stratosphere where it could deplete the ozone layer were known about, but were not seen as a major concern because there wouldn't be a large fleet of Concordes flying around anyway. Concorde was a first-class only aircraft and the way to fly for a small number of well-heeled travellers, celebs, businessmen and heads of state, basically those who didn't have to worry about paying for the tickets, the cost of which were up to $20,000 in today's money. Even before Concorde started in service, when politics got involved, supersonic transport, or SSTs as we're known at the time, were seen by some as the future of air transport, and therefore of vital economic importance. The race to dominate this new supersonic travel would become a matter of national pride amongst the companies developing them, which included the United Kingdom, France, the United States and the Soviet Union, much like the race for space was between the US and the Soviets. when the head of Pan Am, Juan Trippe, announced that he had placed options to buy Concordes rather than wait for the Boeing 2707, President Kennedy, who was about to announce the American SST program the next day, made it very clear that things would become difficult for Pan Am if he didn't retract the statement. That was over 50 years ago, and the world today is a very different place. Private enterprise has in many ways taken the place of government initiatives in space and aerospace, with the likes of SpaceX doing what NASA would have done back in the 1960s. Boom Supersonic is a US startup which formed in 2014 with the aim to produce a supersonic airliner capable of carrying at least 65 passengers at up to Mach 1.7. They received an initial investment of $51 million, including $10 million from JL, the Japanese flag carrier. This has allowed it to develop the 1/3 scale XB-1 demonstrator, which will start flight testing in 2021 to test composite materials for the body, engine dynamics and sustainable fuel, and ways to mitigate the sonic boom. If all goes well, production of the first full-size Overture could start as early as 2023. In the post-pandemic world, smaller, faster planes, where you will spend less time on them, with social distancing built in, might be a lot better too. Overture will be business class and have a similar narrow form factor and size as Concorde, but with just one seat on either side of the central aisle to Concorde's two. The smaller size, comparable to a Boeing 757, means that it will fit into crowded airports easily, unlike the bigger wide-bodied planes like the Boeing 777 and the Airbus A380 in particular, which cost the airports a lot of money to adapt their stands to. Keeping the speed to around Mach 2 like Concorde instead of trying to achieve Mach 3 plus speeds also makes it a lot easier to build a new aircraft. In the 1960s, the Boeing 2707 was to be the all-singing, all-dancing SST, carrying up to 300 passengers at Mach 3, and to destroy Concorde. But to do that, it would have to be built from titanium and employ a massive swing wing design, all of which was costing a fortune in taxpayer funding to develop and almost led to the collapse of Boeing. In the end, it was just too big a risk for the US government to swallow, which cut the program in 1971. Concorde, on the other hand, used technologies of the day that worked. The aluminium body was cheaper and easier to make, but was limited to Mach 2, and the engines were modified versions of those developed for the TSR-2 British supersonic bomber. Boom will use composite materials to build the body of the Overture, similar to those in use today in the latest airliners. Whilst Concorde was a technological marvel at the time and flew from 1969 to 2003, it wasn't the technology or the fatal crash that ended Concorde's run. It was the economics of Airbus, the company which Aérospatiale, the French builders of Concorde, became. After the Paris crash in 2000, modifications had been done to make Concorde safer, and although the downturn in air travel after 9/11 affected the transatlantic routes, Concorde would still be filled on charter flights with enthusiasts. In fact, it was a charter flight that crashed at Paris in 2000. But Concorde's biggest enemy was one of its own parents, Airbus. In 2003, they were about to introduce the A380, their prestigious new super jumbo, which they'd spent about $25 billion and 15 years developing. And for the airlines that were going to buy the A380, the first-class only Concorde posed the only real competition for those high-paying customers on the transatlantic routes. So when in 2003 Airbus announced that it would cease making crucial Concorde spares, that really was the end of the line for Concorde, and with it out of the way, the A380 would rule the roost. Although Concorde suffered the death of 1,000 cuts, the first cut was the deepest, and that was the sonic boom it created. Even before Concorde launched, it had a lot of interest. Sales were estimated to be up to 350 by 1980, and there were over 100 non-binding options from most of the major airlines of the day, which can be seen in the list here. But after the environmental protests in the United States, supersonic flights were banned over populated areas, leaving a much smaller number of suitable routes, mostly across the Atlantic between London, Paris and JFK Dulles Airport on the east coast of the US, and over some unpopulated areas. Concorde burned a lot of fuel, so there would be no long-distance flights across the Pacific, for example, and it attracted almost as many protesters as it did supporters wherever it went. In 1973, the oil crisis dramatically pushed up the cost of oil, making an already expensive to operate aircraft even more so. Smoky prototype engines, environmental protests, the sonic boom, and the cost of fuel meant that Concorde returned home from a worldwide sales drive with zero sales. Not even British Airways or even Air France wanted it. So the British government effectively gave 5 Concordes with a total value of over £100 million to British Airways on a profit-sharing deal. So no money would go to the government until Concorde turned a profit, just to get a single sale. British Airways and Air France lost millions on Concorde during the 1970s. So in the 1980s, they put their prices up to double that of first class on normal routes, and they also allowed anyone with the money to charter a Concorde to go anywhere they wanted. The charter business boomed and opened up many of the previously closed places so long as they didn't go supersonic over populated areas. Concorde became as much an experience as a way to travel, something that could be done again. If any new SST is to fly more routes than Concorde, then they're going to have to find a way to mitigate that sonic boom. NASA has been developing the X-59, a low-boom, extra-long-nose demonstrator aircraft with Lockheed Martin. Using supercomputer simulations, they believe they can reduce the loud bang of sonic boom to more of a soft thump, about the same as a car door slam. This will be achieved by making the edges on things like the nose and engine inlets longer, and as such making the sonic boom softer. Positioning the engines above the wings could also shield the shockwave from those below the aircraft. The next big issue is sustainability and zero carbon travel. This is achievable now with special fuels and engine modifications, but they are very expensive. Capturing carbon from the air and then placing it back into synthetic aviation fuel is seen as one way of effectively creating a carbon circle of capture, use, and then recapture. Biofuels are another, but that plant-based material would be better used to feed people rather than fly them around in a luxury aircraft. The engines will also be of key importance. They must be capable of Mach 2.2 without an afterburner to reduce fuel consumption, noise and pollution. Boom have teamed up with Rolls-Royce, who supplied the Olympus 593 engines for Concorde, to work on the new engines for Overture, and have said that these new engines would use about 75% less fuel than Concorde did. Some have pointed out that using the most expensive fuel in an aircraft that will be the least economical compared to the latest subsonic aircraft could be the worst of all worlds, and would be one of the biggest challenges to try and keep the ticket prices realistic. For Overture to work, big investments by the engine builders and the fuel companies will need to take place, even though the initial returns will be small because there won't be many of these aircraft flying around. In recent weeks, United Airlines has said that it will purchase 15 Overtures with an option for a further 35. The US Air Force has also awarded a contract to Boom to explore the use of SSTs for Air Force executive transport and to enable the rapid movement of US diplomats, business leaders and key staff around the world faster than any existing methods. So, just as we saw the growth of SpaceX over the last 15 years based on a more sustainable operation model, maybe Boom could do the same for supersonic travel. And of course, if they are seen to do well, other companies and aircraft will follow. And maybe we will be flying not only faster, but in a greener, cleaner, more sustainable way at some point in the not too distant future. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then please subscribe, thumbs up, click the bell notification and share. And a big thanks goes out to all of our patrons out there for their ongoing support.